For centuries, Bible students have wrestled with Jesus' words in the Olivet Discourse. His urgent warnings about fleeing from danger, his vivid images of housetops and fields, and his references to desolation have stirred both fear and fascination. But what if the familiar interpretation we've been taught is incomplete? What if Jesus was not describing one flight to safety, but two distinct moments in Israel's story, each with its own destination and meaning? This possibility invites us to look again, to listen more carefully, and to discover a depth in his prophecy that many have overlooked. In this video, we'll compare the common understanding of Israel's flight to safety with a fresh perspective. The traditional view sees one crisis, one escape, one fulfillment. My proposed view, however, recognizes two flights, one already fulfilled in Israel's past, and one yet to come in her future. By examining the language of Jesus' warnings and the prophetic context surrounding them, we'll uncover how these two flights, though similar in urgency, lead to very different destinations, and why that distinction matters for understanding both history and the hope of Christ's return. Most Bible students have been taught that Jesus, in the Olivet Discourse, refers to a single moment when Israel must flee to safety. This view typically identifies the warning in Matthew 24, Mark 13, and Luke 21 as pointing to one crisis event. Depending on the interpreter, that event is either the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD or a future tribulation tied to the abomination of desolation. In both cases, the assumption is that Jesus' words describe one decisive flight, one historical or eschatological moment when God's people must escape danger. This reading has become the standard framework in many classrooms, sermons, and study guides, shaping how generations of students approach the passage. The strength of this common view lies in its simplicity. It treats Jesus' warning as a unified prophecy, easy to map onto a single timeline. But that simplicity comes at a cost. By collapsing the discourse into one flight, it overlooks the textual distinctions between Luke's account of Jerusalem's fall and Matthew and Mark's emphasis on a future desecration of the holy place. As a result, students often miss the layered precision of Jesus' teaching. The common view assumes one warning, one fulfillment, and one escape. But in doing so, it risks flattening the richness of the prophecy and obscuring the way Jesus speaks to both Israel's past and her future. The prevailing theory treats the abomination of desolation as purely eschatological, tied exclusively to the end times. But this collapses Jesus' discourse into a single horizon and ignores the historical context of his words. In Matthew 24, Jesus explicitly warns of the destruction of the temple, calling it a desolation. That warning makes immediate sense in light of the Roman siege of Jerusalem in 70 AD, when believers did in fact flee Judea. To force this passage into a strictly future framework risks erasing the precision of Jesus' prophecy and the validation of his words in history. The common view, in its eagerness to see everything as end time, overlooks the near-term fulfillment that confirmed Jesus as a true prophet to his generation. By contrast, Luke 17 records Jesus speaking of the days of the Son of Man, which clearly points forward to his return. These events, sudden, cosmic, unmistakable, belong to the second coming, not the ascension era. Maintaining this distinction is crucial. Matthew 24's desolation is tied to the destruction of the temple and the flight from Judea, while Luke 17's warnings belong to the eschatological horizon of Christ's return. To conflate them is to blur two different moments in Israel's story, one already fulfilled in her past and one yet to be fulfilled in her future. Recognizing both preserves the integrity of Jesus' teaching and allows us to see his words as layered prophecy, validated in history, and awaiting consummation at his coming. The first flight. Departure into the nations. The first flight, tied to Matthew 24 and the destruction of the temple, can be understood as Israel's departure from her land and her arrival among the nations. When Jerusalem fell in 70 AD, the Jewish people were scattered, and the believing remnant fled Judea. This was not only a physical departure, but also a prophetic one. Israel's story moved outward, dispersing into the Gentile world. The arrival was exile. The nations became the place of survival, the context in which God's people would live until his purposes unfolded further. This departure and arrival validated Jesus' prophecy and marked the beginning of Israel's long sojourn among the nations. The second flight. Return to Jerusalem. The second flight, tied to Luke 17 and the days of the Son of Man, is different. Here, the departure is not just from Judea, but from the land of Israel as a whole, as God's people are gathered and drawn into the climactic arrival, the city of Jerusalem, renewed and restored at Christ's return. This is not exile, but homecoming. The nations stream back, the scattered are regathered, and the arrival is no longer dispersion, but consummation, the fulfillment of God's promise that his reign will center in Zion. The second flight thus reverses the first. What began as departure into the nations ends as arrival in the holy city under the reign of Christ. Since 1948, the modern state of Israel has witnessed a remarkable regathering of her people from the nations. This ongoing return, known as Aliyah, fulfills the prophetic vision of God drawing his people back to the land after centuries of dispersion. Jews from every corner of the earth have come home to settle, rebuild, and re-establish life in the land promised to their fathers. Aliyah is the first stage of Israel's restoration, a homecoming that demonstrates God's faithfulness and sets the stage for what is yet to come. It is a return to the land, but not yet the climactic return to the city where God has chosen to place his name. The prophets speak of a second stage, a gathering not just to the land, but to Jerusalem itself. Joel declares that in Mount Zion and in Jerusalem there will be those who escape, and Malachi foretells the Lord suddenly coming to his temple. This second stage will unfold in a time of crisis, when the call will go out for Israel's citizens to rally to the holy city. Just as the first stage brought Israel back to the land, the second will draw her into the city of God. Those who hear the call and return to Jerusalem will be preserved, for in that gathering the promise of salvation is revealed. Aliyah is the beginning. The flight to Jerusalem is the consummation. The return of Israel can be pictured as a journey with multiple legs. The first leg is Aliyah, the homecoming of Jews from the nations back to the land of Israel since 1948. This is like boarding the plane and flying to the layover destination. The people have returned to the land, settled, and begun to rebuild life there. It is a remarkable fulfillment of prophecy, but it is not yet the final destination. Aliyah is the layover, necessary, significant, but still awaiting the next stage of the journey. The second leg of the journey will come in a time of crisis, when the call goes out for Israel's citizens to gather not just in the land, but in the city of Jerusalem itself. This is the final destination of the flight. The prophets Joel and Malachi speak of this climactic gathering, when those who heed the call and return to Jerusalem will be preserved. Just as the first leg brought Israel back to the land, the second will bring her into the city where God has chosen to place his name. The journey begins with a layover in the land, but it ends with arrival in Jerusalem, the place of salvation and the center of Christ's reign. The language Jesus uses in the Olivet Discourse to describe both the historical and eschatological flights is strikingly similar, which can easily confuse Bible students. In both cases, he warns against remaining on the housetop or lingering in the field when the moment of crisis arrives. The urgency of escape is the same, whether in the first century or at the end of the age. But our anchor in interpreting these passages is the second coming of Christ. By keeping his return as the fixed point of reference, we can distinguish between the near-term fulfillment in Israel's past and the ultimate fulfillment in her future. The repetition of language is not redundancy, it is precision, showing that the same kind of obedience will be required in both moments. The difference lies in the destination. During the historical flight, the believers who obeyed Jesus' warning fled Jerusalem and entered exile among the nations. Their departure was survival, and their arrival was dispersion. In the eschatological flight, however, the destination is not exile, but homecoming. Those who heed the call will depart from the land as a whole and arrive in the city of Jerusalem, the place of salvation and the center of Christ's reign. In both cases, the journey is marked by obedience and results in deliverance. Those who fled in the past were saved, and those who will escape in the future will be saved. The shared language underscores the continuity of God's mercy, while the differing destinations highlight the unfolding of His plan, from scattering to gathering, from exile to consummation. We began by asking whether Jesus' warnings in the Olivet Discourse describe one flight or two. Along the way, we've seen how the common view collapses His words into a single horizon, while the text itself points to two distinct departures and arrivals. The first flight, fulfilled in Israel's past, led to exile among the nations. The second flight, still to come, will lead to salvation in the city of Jerusalem. Both share the same urgency, both require obedience, and both reveal the mercy of God, warning His people so that they might escape and live. The anchor for all of this is the second coming of Christ. His return is the fixed point that clarifies the difference between the historical and the eschatological flights. One proved His words true in history, the other will prove them true in glory. And so the story of Israel's journeys, from departure to arrival, from scattering to gathering, from layover to destination, is ultimately the story of God's faithfulness. The prophecy that once saved lives in the first century will save lives again. And in both cases, those who heed His call will find safety, salvation, and hope in Him. We're building a space for honest, grace-filled discovery. If that sounds like something you want to be part of, subscribe and click the bell to stay connected. Thanks for watching.